In this week's video, I'm going to be showing you how I painted up this Praetorian from Lil Legend Studio. For anyone who's interested, this is available for sale at the moment. The link is in the description below. The model is primed in black, and we're going over it right now with Games Workshop Incubi Darkness. Now, for a white paint job, it may seem strange to be starting from a black base coat, but we're going to be able to cover it enough with the airbrush, and it also means that all of those darkest recesses that we can't get our brush into are going to be black, so it just makes life easier in the long run. One of the big mistakes that people make when airbrushing, especially with white, is they go from a very dark and then they get pure white in their airbrush and they jump straight to the white. This can leave a lot of speckling and it can make the transitions very rough. The way that I get around this is I build up gradually from my dark color. So my paint recipe is incredibly simple in this. It's Games Workshop Incubi Darkness and Vallejo Game Air White. And all I'm doing is I'm getting the Incubi Darkness and I'm mixing in more and more of the Game Air White. Now, what white you choose to use, this is just my preference. So if you like Games Workshop whites, then use Games Workshop whites. I'm not particularly a big fan, but the idea is we're gradually adding in more and more white until we get to pure white. As always, my airbrush mix for thinning is equal parts paint, water, and Vallejo Flow Improver. And you can see this is the final point where we're going to true white. And the idea is where all of those areas that are facing directly upwards are receiving the white. Now, there is more work to be done over the top of this, so it really doesn't have to be perfect. But if we build it up slowly from the Incubi Darkness, incrementally up into the pure white, then you should be able to get a nice transition. The other thing that I would say, white is a really awkward color to airbrush. One of the other mistakes people make is they have their compressor at too low a pressure. My compressor normally sits around 34 PSI. I have it really, really high, and then I control the actual pressure that comes out through the trigger. Don't have your pressure too low because it will just cause you to get dry tip quite a lot on the airbrush and you'll get a lot of speckling. Now, this is supposed to be a quick, fun paint job to add to an army one day. So I don't want to go insane with the quality or masking things up. All I've done with the inside of the cloak here, the cloak is black and I've got Games Workshop Xereus Purple, Xereus Purple, I don't know, this purple. And I'm gradually building up with a little bit of white and I'm building up over the black to brighten it up. One of the things that I'll say when army painting, for me anyway, is a really simple paint scheme goes a long, long way. So if I can get away with painting something with two colors, I'm absolutely going to. So with the white being Incubi Darkness and adding white, the purple being Xereus Purple, adding a little bit of white, and then moving on to the red is going to be the same thing. If I can keep these things simple, it makes it very easy to replicate these color schemes. Now, what you're going to see with this red, this is Games Workshop Evil Sunz Scarlett. If I paint this red over pure black, doesn't matter how many coats that I'm going to get, I'm always going to get a dark red. And that is not what I want. I want it to really pop. But I don't want to spend loads of time building up lots of different shades of red. To get around this, what I'm doing is I'm just going back to pure white and I'm airbrushing in the areas on this model that I might want to be bright. So the areas of the cloak that I want to have a nice highlight, I'm airbrushing white. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the red over the top. Now you'll notice as I'm painting all of these things, there's little bits that are going over the white armor. I'm not bothered about that. Normally I'd probably be a little bit more careful, but I think it's useful to show in this video that it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of overspray anywhere. We'll get on to fixing that shortly. But you can see this is the same Evil Sunz Scarlett once again. Now that I'm going over it, this Evil Sunz Scarlett is now popping and it's really, really lively. This is exactly what we want. All we need to do is just get enough coats over it to make sure that we've got that nice rich red that we want. Where we left the dark black areas, those are now the shadows. Where we've got those nice bright areas of white, those are now the highlights. We just talked about the overspray. I'm going back in with the Games Workshop Incubi Darkness and I'm just airbrushing a little bit over where I got all of that purple and red overspray. And then I'm going back in once again with the pure white and I'm just topping off the highlights where I made that little bit of a mess. Now you can still see there's still hints of purple and red in this armor. it's not a big deal. First of all, variation in the hue of your palette is not a bad thing. I know a lot of people like these perfect recipes and it has to all be the same. You don't need to worry about that. All it's going to do is add visual interest. Next up, a little bit of weathering. You don't have to do this if you like it nice and clean, but for me, especially for speed painting, I feel like this is really important. So we just got some blister sponge out of an old GW packet or an old carry case. I've got a little bit of Rhinox hide on it. I've removed the excess and then I'm very gently just putting on a couple of random marks. I'm not doing a lot. I'm keeping it incredibly light. There's a couple of reasons why I feel like this is really, really important, especially for army painting when you can get away with it, or speed painting. Firstly, because it adds variation to big flat panels, which can be a little bit boring. But more importantly, if your armor or your model is worn and weathered, when you make mistakes, it means it's very easy to just put a big scratch across them and hide that mistake, which is great. Next up, what I've got is Games Workshop Contrast Shyish Purple. Now, first of all, I'm adding some of the Games Workshop thinning medium, the contrast thinning medium. I forget what it's called. And I'm going to paint this over the white. Problem with the contrast paints is when they go on, they still go on very strongly. They leave a very strong opaque paint, and I don't want that. So you can see that I've just rubbed that off with a nice clean brush. What I'm going to do with this now is I'm going to add quite a lot of water to it. What I want is I want the properties of the contrast paint where it doesn't really puddle too much, but I want it much thinner than just the thinning medium. So what I'm looking for is something quite close to a wash. And when I try and absorb the paint off of my brush onto a paper towel, you can see how that paint absorbs off and it really sucks it up. So this paint is incredibly thin and it's got probably an equal mix of contrast paint, contrast medium and water. And what I'm doing is I'm working it over the whole of the white. Now I'm only doing one area of white armor at once because I need to work this before it dries. So what you can see with me doing now is as soon as I put that contrast paint over the white armor, I go and clean my brush, dry it off, and then I absorb off any puddles or pooling of contrast. So what I want this to do is I want this to give the white armor a nice shift in color. I want it to have a nice purple tint to it, but I still want it to look incredibly bright. So we've thinned it down loads, put the contrast paint over the whole lot of it, and then remove the excess, remove any puddles or pooling so it doesn't look messy. And ultimately, the reason here for me using the purple is I find that it looks quite nice. So the job of this contrast paint is twofold. It works firstly like a wash, but it behaves better than the traditional GW washes. So basically it flows a lot better. There's less chance of getting nasty coffee stains and big blobs of paint that you don't want if you thin it down a little bit more. It also operates as a filter, so it shifts the hue of your color. So if I go over this white with purple, it's going to look more purple. If I go over it more with a green contrast, it's going to be more green. So you can use it to influence the result as you see fit. And you can also use multiple colors. Like if you wanted to, you can have more purple towards the bottom and more yellow towards the top. That would give you a more luminous color towards the top and make it pop even more. Again, the choice is yours. Experiment with it, but it's a lot of fun. And I think the result looks really good in the end. Previously, you could see that I'd base coated everything else black. This is just something that I like to do, especially when I'm painting metallics over the top. In this case, it's preparation for Scale 75 Victorian Brass. You don't have to use Scale 75. Any metallics will work. These are just the ones that I particularly like. Basically, what I've got here is I'm painting all of the trim in a bronze. I prefer it over a black base coat because I feel like it gives a nicer result, but it's not massively important. It's your choice. The idea is we're going to cover all of the metallic areas with this Victorian brass to give us this nice vibrant bronze. The challenge that comes with this though, for me, it's too cartoony. It's too over the top. It's too bright for this character. I don't like it. So what I need to do now is I need to knock it back. The way that I'm going to do this is with Games Workshop Contrast Dark Angels. This is basically going over all of the bronze with a green wash. Same mix as I used for the Shyish Purple, so it's got water and contrast medium in it. And basically what this does, and you can see how much of a massive difference this is, the green goes into the recesses, which adds a lot of visual interest, but it also makes the bronze a lot duller. It's nowhere near as bright orange, and it goes to like this pale yellow. And in my opinion, it looks really nice, and it's more fitting for the character. And you can really see the difference between like the helmet and the shoulder pads, or the legs and the shoulders at the moment. Like, the difference is huge. It's really, really pretty. I think so anyway. If you wanted to keep it a little bit more like the original bronze, then just like a brown wash or something like an orange wash will do the job just as well. I wanted it toned down quite a lot though, because it's just too orange for the result that I'm going for. So a couple of options that you can do. Again, this whole idea of this paint job is simplify everything as possible. And then lastly, it's just painting all of the details. The details, I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time on them. When it comes to speed painting, and I'm going to do a full video on army painting. I've got a couple of armies here that we're going to do a video on. But when it comes to army painting, you need to pick the areas of the model that are important. So as a general rule, that's the face and the weapons. But sometimes it can be other things. For example, Space Marines, the armor is the most important part because it's what everyone really sees from across the other side of the table. The details aren't really overly important. So a base coat and a wash is more than acceptable on the details, and then just make everything else pop and stand out. If you've got, that decision needs to be based around what model you have in front of you. If your models have got big weapons, then obviously the weapon is going to be the focal point, and you really need to make that pop. If they've all got bare heads, then you're going to have to spend some time and make sure the heads are working and looking really good. So the decision you make is yours. The very last step, and this is entirely optional, is whether you choose to do edge highlights or not. Now, one of the big things that happens when you're airbrushing for a start is your paints can look very washed out, which is why we do washes to make everything pop. And some people do them with oil washes, you can do them with contrast paints, whatever works. But that makes a big difference. The other thing that's incredibly important is readability. So we need our models to clearly have separation of shapes. We need to look at them from the other side of the table and clearly and quickly understand what's going on with them. The best way to do this is to add some nice clean edge highlights. You do not need to edge highlight every edge though. You just need to highlight the ones that are prominent or the ones that are going to benefit the model. So in this case, I'm only going to edge highlight the edges that are facing upwards, and specifically the edges on the metallics only. I'm not going to touch any of the armor panels, just the metals, because the armor panels are relatively flat and they've got that recess wash from the Shyish Purple, so they don't really need it. The metallics, on the other hand, really would benefit from it. And the paint that I'm using for the edge highlights on the metallic, on the bronze, is Scale 75 Heavy Metal. Again, it's entirely your choice, but basically this is a silver. And that's it. Hopefully you like it. As I said at the beginning, if you are interested in buying this model, this is not a sponsored video, but if you're interested in buying it, check out the link for Lil Legend Studios in the description below. As always, if you like this video, please hit the like button. It means a massive, massive difference to the channel. And if you want to see more, hit the subscribe. If you want to be part of the community, feel free to join the members area. Again, links are all in the description. But regardless of all of that, thank you everyone for watching. Your time means a massive amount to me and I really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.